Fredrickson. I'm the president of the American Constitution Society. And on behalf of ACS, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion panel, Share and Share Alike, the regulatory challenges of the new sharing economy. For those of you who are not familiar with the American Constitution Society, we were founded in 2001 as a national network of lawyers, judges, policymakers, academics, and law students that believe that the law should be a force to improve the lives of all people. ACS works for positive change by shaping debate on vitally important legal and constitutional questions, and it is our mission to ensure the fundamental principles of human dignity and individual rights and liberties enjoy their rightful central place in American law. Living in Washington, D.C., we are all familiar with the very obvious aspects of the so-called sharing economy, ride sharing through services like Uber and Lyft, as well as short-term apartment rentals like Airbnb. But the sharing economy is so much more expansive, including such things as on-demand personal assistance, crowdsourcing, and any number of peer-to-peer microtransactions. The companies composing the sharing economy are becoming major economic drivers, powered by technology and innovation, which seem to be outpacing decades-old regulatory schemes and the agencies providing oversight. Because of that, we must address the nature of regulating these emerging industries and ask whether new regulatory mechanisms are needed and what they should look like. Today, we have brought together government and industry leaders to discuss how they can work together to shape a framework that ensures consumer protection without stifling innovation. Here to lead the discussion is Tim Sparapani, the founder and principal of SPQR Strategies. Tim has long worked in the tech sphere, most recently as Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs with the Application Developers Alliance. He was also the Director of Public Policy at Facebook, and before that served as Senior Legislative Counsel at the ACLU, where he was a dearly beloved colleague of mine. So I would like to now turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, Caroline. It's really unbelievable. I know you can hear me back. It's how loud I am up here. It's bothering me. So let me just begin by saying a few words of thank you. First, to the House Judiciary Committee leadership. Bipartisan effort got us this room, this space today, and I am so thankful to them. You will notice that one of our chairs is currently unoccupied. Slade with the Democratic staff will be hopefully joining us, I think, at the top of the hour, if the debate that he's currently helping to work on is concluded. But again, my thanks to the Judiciary Committee leadership. I also wanted to take a moment and both plug the American Constitution Society and thank it for its leadership. I have long been a supporter of ACS. If you aren't now, you should be. Does really phenomenal work and leadership. I know the National Convention is coming out in early June, I think June 11th through 13th. I hope people will go. Caroline's good with me, yes, good. I got that one right, good. Nice. Really a tremendous organization and worthy of people's support. Put on a lot of panels like this to help engage in thought leadership. I'm joined today by some tremendous speakers and people who've got deep insight into the sharing economy. We're going to have hopefully a wide-ranging, free-flowing discussion where I will talk very little and simply poke people when things get a little bit quiet. We're definitely going to have time for questions at the end. This is a good long while we've managed to reserve for ourselves. So I'm glad you're all here. I want to tell a quick personal story before I dive in and start asking questions and let the panelists introduce themselves and give a few short remarks from their perspectives. I was very fortunate in that on Tuesday I took an earlier train instead of taking the later train that went up to New York and later was derailed. I actually came within minutes of changing to the later train. My wife and I were debating whether I should go up after we put our daughter to bed, which is what I typically would do. And I happened to get on an early train. And that's all well and good. And obviously my thoughts and prayers are with everyone who's been affected. Getting back last night from New York was a bit of a challenge, and this is why I tell the story now. Because I always, in carrying one of these, I had a ticket on a bus back by 11:30, just hours after their announcement of the accident. And it wasn't until the next morning when I was at another panel such as this, where I was giving some keynote remarks and talking to friends in the privacy community where I spend a lot of time, that a number of people who similarly are from DC happened to be at the same event in New York were trying to figure out and struggling to figure out how to get back to DC last night. Planes were already booked. Most of the buses had already been booked, and thousands of people, as you all, I'm sure, are aware, were stranded. And then 3 of the people got together and said, we'll get an Uber driver. And sure enough, they were able to get an Uber driver within minutes of hatching this plan, and they all threw in money, and they all agreed together to go back by Uber and get a driver incentivized to drive them back, or else they might still be here. So really kind of a personal story about what the sharing economy can mean in strange moments and unexpected moments. I thought it was just ironic that the next day I was going to be here and that they were able to take advantage of the new economy that's growing and sort of avoid other really challenging delays in their travel. So with that as a backdrop, I wanted to go ahead and dive in. And I wanted to start perhaps with Dennis Herrera, who's with us from San Francisco. We go right down the panel and do a quick introduction and share some thoughts. And Dennis, thank you so much for joining us all the way.
My pleasure, Tim. I'm Dennis Herrera, and I am the city attorney in San Francisco. I was elected in 2001 and now finishing up my 4th term as city attorney. And it is a wonderfully expansive role when you have 350 of the best legal professionals that you can find anywhere, involved in everything from marriage equality to defending police officers and community bus accidents. So it's an incredibly expansive role. And one thing that has started to take up a heck of a lot of time in our office is how do we deal with the challenges posed by a new economic paradigm in the sharing economy. And it's not surprising we have 2 people on this panel from San Francisco, since it is ground zero for the explosion of the sharing economy. And for me, I think it's kind of ironic that we're hosting this symposium here in Herrera building, because if you believe in a federalist model, this is an inherently local and state issue when it comes to regulation. And it is the prime laboratory about how you can fashion public policy to meet and deal with a local need. I think it's very, very difficult, obviously, to deal with this on a national level, and especially when you have so many municipalities that have their own regulations and how they regulate a whole variety of economic models. And for us, it has been particularly challenging. If you look in California, Uber was the first to start in sort of coming up with a new economic model, and I'm sure Matt's going to talk a little bit about it with respect to the Uber black cars and how they went to the state PUC to create a whole new category of the regulation of vehicles, the TNC model, which is a little bit different from what you see with the other Ubers that are driving around. More recently, you may have seen that there was a law passed in San Francisco to try and regulate Airbnb and home rentals. That has met with a great debate in San Francisco, to the point where now there are opponents that are threatening to put a ballot measure on the ballot to severely limit the ability to do home rentals from home away and Airbnb and the like. And I think what it points up, and what I have tried to talk about, is the necessity for public policymakers at the local and state level to get out front of these issues. In fact, several years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I wrote an op-ed, which we did not get published, unfortunately, with Mark Chandler, the general counsel at Cisco, and Mark Lemley, who heads the tech academic practice at Stanford. We're coming at it from the perspective of 3 lawyers, one in government, one in academia, and one in business, about the necessity for legislators and public policymakers to get out front, to deal with the issues and sort of meet the changing economic landscape, to sort of have a public policy debate on how laws needed to change to meet a new economic paradigm. Because what would happen otherwise is it would fall to people like me to enforce existing laws that are on the books now. And I don't think that the right way to make public policy is through litigation. That's a very poor way to make policy. You have to have a policy debate, and it's something that hopefully, as we continue with the explosion that we're seeing, policymakers at the local and state level are going to become more attuned to getting out front on issues. Because to date, they have been increasingly or incredibly timid and haven't gotten out front of this. And unfortunately, it has gone to regulators like me and others to sort of enforce the existing law. As I said earlier, it's a very, very poor way to make public policy. And I applaud ACS for hosting a panel like this, because this is exactly the type of discussion that we need to inform legislators and policymakers on the importance of getting out front on issues.
Thank you, Dennis. Christina Weaver is with the Raven Group. She is one of the best-known lobbyists in Washington and policymakers. Christina, please.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. And thank you all for having me on this panel. This is a great opportunity. I actually think when we look at the sharing economy, I think we're all kind of living in a very unique time right now. With technology, there comes so many, new opportunities and new rooms for economic growth that, a lot of times happen way faster than the law can actually keep up with. But one of the things that I think we tend to see, not just with the sharing economy, but you see this with this is something that different marketplaces or online marketplaces have dealt with. You see there are always bad actors that might try to kind of come in and take advantage of a platform, but you kind of see industry stakeholders coming together and coming up with solutions that will protect the consumer, but at the same time will be careful not to stifle innovation. So I think we're kind of at a critical point here where we want to make sure that these types of economies and these types of services are readily available and can continue to grow and find new creative ways to better serve people and new creative ways for lower and middle income people to kind of make their situation better. But at the same time, we don't want to kind of overregulate to the point where we are stifling the ability for new companies and new technologies to emerge. And I think, working in Washington, a little background on myself, I was legislative counsel for Congressman Jackson Lee a few years ago, worked on the Judiciary Committee, and then left there to go to the Raven Group where I've been now for the last 3.5 years. Working largely with tech companies on privacy issues, intellectual property, some financial services issues as well. But I've kind of got this unique perspective, this unique benefit to be able to view the sharing economy through the eyes of many, many different stakeholders. And I think over the years you've seen a shift where it starts people kind of at each other, no, we need to do this, no, we need to do that. And really 3 years in Washington is not very long, to be completely honest. And you've seen a complete shift where folks come to the table, similar to what you mentioned, Dennis, and are able to have a policy debate and substantive policy discussion to kind of come to compromises and come to agreements. And in many ways, we end up working faster than Congress does. So no slight to Slade when you guys here. But so that's just what I kind of wanted to throw out there in the ether, and looking forward to the rest of this discussion.
And last but not least, Matt Burton from Uber. There's a tendency whenever you have a discussion like this for the most well-known company to have to stand in for all the other companies in the broad thing we call the sharing economy. And Matt, despite that tendency, was willing to come and spend some time with us and share Uber's thoughts. And so it's especially appreciated, Matt, that you're willing to stand up for everybody, all the other economy changing companies out there. But I hope that you'll talk more than just about Uber, also about those other companies. And I urge everybody in the audience to ask questions not just focused at Uber, but about all the other aspects of the economy that are being disrupted by these integrated companies.
Thanks, Tim. That's a good segue into my disclaimer, of course, which is that I am really here to speak about. I'm not here to speak about the rest of the ride-sharing industry or on behalf of them, or on behalf of the larger sharing economy. I'm happy to pose questions and talk more broadly, but my remarks are as a representative of Uber Technologies. I also wanted to thank the American Constitution Society for putting this together and inviting us to participate. We really appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to just focus on a few things that are central to Uber and to our company, and I think by focusing on those things, they help serve as a good factor predicate for the broader discussion of concepts and themes for today. I think the first thing is that we are fundamentally a technology company, which means as a technology company we develop and license software. We develop and license that software to certain individuals who want to provide, in our core business, who want to provide transportation services on our digital platform. And we license that software to people who want to receive and obtain those transportation services, who are the riders. And that simple idea has led to really exponential growth in the past 4 or 5 years. We started, the company was founded in 2009 by Travis Kalanick and Gary Camp, and it started from a very simple idea, which is that, or it's a very simple problem. They were at a conference, an internet conference in Paris, and they were saying it was raining one night, and they were unable, no matter how much they tried, to get a taxi. And I think the taxi system is particularly hard. It's bad in Paris. And using what's now available through GPS technology, payment processing, and other features of the internet economy, we developed this app. And we've grown from a small presence in 2010 in San Francisco to over 300 cities and over 56 countries globally today. So we license the software to drivers and riders, and our relationship with drivers and the drivers themselves, or driver partners, is something else I wanted to highlight here, because I think it is, there may be similarities to other parts of the sharing economy. The drivers use their own assets. They use their own cars. There are no hours. They drive on their own schedule, their own hours, and their own location. They frequently do it part-time to supplement other forms of income, and so overall, they are really, we consider them, why we call them partners is because they really are their own entrepreneurs trying to build a small business or supplement whatever other income they receive from other sources. And the drivers, you all may be familiar or use the service, and I don't know if you ever asked them why they do it, but it's often an interesting conversation because they're often, number one, doing a lot of other different things with their lives, and number two, they really, and this has been borne out by a study we did with the economist Alan Kluger at Princeton, that they really appreciate the flexibility that this sort of platform offers to earn more income, to have flexibility in their schedule, to balance work and family, and to just basically be their own boss. That's the second component, driver. The third thing I wanted to just emphasize briefly is our focus as a company on safety and for riders and drivers, and a lot of that safety is built into the technology itself. As you use the product, you're always on a map. You're able to share your location with others. All of the transactions are cashless, which is often a source of crime in taxis. You can wait indoors and not out on the street late at night to wait for a pickup. and you know who your driver is who's coming, and generally the transactions and the trips are tracked. So there's a significant disincentive for people to behave poorly. The drivers are, of course, also rated, and we monitor those ratings to ensure that the platform is reliable and that people can really count on not only that the service gets there fast, but it's also good and a good service. And of course, in addition to all those technological safety features, we review drivers' backgrounds, we have insurance in place for our particular company. And I guess broadening, I think, and to sort of Dennis's point about government getting involved, we have been supportive of smart laws and smart regulations, and we can talk about this more in a minute, but overall, and we've been pushing those sorts of regimes across the country this year and beyond to ensure that there are regulations that are well adapted to this new industry of ride sharing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. Slade Bond was able to join us a little bit earlier than expected, and as I mentioned earlier, Slade is from the minority staff of the Judiciary Committee. Slade, we've already thanked the committee for returning the room. I know you were deeply involved in that. Slade, if you'd like to give us a few opening thoughts, please.
Well, thanks, Tim. I'd like to thank everyone for dealing with arguments we're in market currently, so it was kind of nice that you were allowed to yield time for me to come up. So just to reiterate, I'm counsel on the Subcommittee on Regulatory Reform, Commercial Antitrust Law, Animal Regulations, and Antitrust. Specifically, and really fortunate to say that I do not speak for the Subcommittee or a member, so you're looking for a bio. But I want to cover two main topics today on the subject of regulating the sharing economy. First being that I don't think that the sharing economy is a monolith, and I don't think that any one aspect of the economy is representative of the economy as a whole or a regulatory model. And secondly, to discuss briefly several models for regulating each aspect or component of the sharing economy as represented by each vertical competitor. So to begin with, like I said, the sharing economy is first changing. So there's something that's particularly interesting about this, and that's the evolving business models in that one of our panels today, we were, if you go to the panel where a number of different sharing economy competitors in that space are speaking. You'll hear about the future of driverless cars being the next great competitor in the sharing economy that applies to driving. Additionally, the standards for insurance underwriting are changing all the time when it comes to the short-term rental markets as well as drivers. So that's another thing to monitor. But the main thing I would point out is that Uber is not Airbnb, which is a Thumbtack, which is an Etsy. And if we were to try to regulate from the top-down perspective with any model, I think that would either risk being on a federal level, risk being outpaced by changes within the sub-economy, or more specifically, somewhat inappropriate for each aspect of these competitors' business models. But with that in mind, moving to what models regulation might be, one of the things that I think is fairly instructive in this debate is several areas of regulation applied to the consumer privacy space, which is pretty vast in terms of ideas for not just regulation, but industry self-regulation, safe harbors within the legislative context, and then government-directed multi-stakeholder processes. So those familiar with the NTIA, which Tim was just in know that the Obama administration, through its blueprint for consumer privacy a few years back, set in motion the process for a multi-stakeholder agreement in the consumer privacy space that applied to mobile. And the administration has also undertook, which is ongoing now, a similar process that applies to facial recognition. Now, this is not pure self-regulation because the industry is coming to the table in light of pressure from the administration and federal actors to negotiate a path forward. But it is still instructive in that you have diverse competitors in an economy that is rapidly changing, coming to the table to discuss potential compromises in a path forward that's both perhaps consumer-friendly and also one that would not impede innovation or growth. With that in mind, I think that the ultimate ideal would be to preserve the so-called blue oceans that the sharing economy has been able to tap, which are ones that are not bred with competition already, but instead are where competitors are battling other competitors, but creating new paths for innovation in uncontested market space. So with that in mind, self-regulation, as guided through a multi-stakeholder process is one model. Another might be judicial enforcement. So this is one of the rare areas where I would probably agree with my colleagues at Mercatus in that the courts are well equipped to deal with externalities in the market as they arise. However, one of the shortcomings of the 2014 paper was that it said that the courts, as they're currently comprised, are in the best position to protect consumers and prevent these type of market externalities. One of the shortcomings of this approach, this court-only approach, is that competitors within the marketplace engage in what are called forced arbitration agreements or pre-dispute arbitration agreements, wherein a consumer is bound to arbitrate in a forum of the dominant parties venue. So the CFPB earlier this year, under its 1028 authority in Dodd-Frank, released a study on this, saying specifically that these types of agreements limit relief for consumers, and if anything, would restrict the ability of consumers to access the same type of rights and benefits they would through the justice system. So that's one area where, yes, the courts would be not necessarily ideal, but certainly capable of enforcing consumer protections as we'd like to see them, and yet they're probably not able to in light of the massive growth of forced arbitration agreements over the past 15 years. Additionally, there's also a budding, scholarship in the area of permitting and other, I would say, innovative models for regulation that might, on the same token as these self-regulatory models, promote growth by also ensuring that the type of market externalities that we're concerned with would be prevented. So the Administrative Conference of the United States, ACUS, which is sort of an experts group of advisors who routinely write papers on the subject of administrative law, are currently engaged in a research project that will specifically look at federal licensing and permitting, which is about the driest topic you can get, but where it's relevant here is that the two authors of the study that have been, authorized by ACUS have written extensively on the subject of perhaps permits are an appropriate model for sharing economy, if not on a federal level, then even on a state level. And this is two professors, Weaver and Rule, wrote in the Law Journal 347 on this pretty extensively, and then on regulatory blogs, that general permits may be more useful where the regulated activities cause small harms individually, but are relatively uniform in the harm they cause collectively. And so that's something that's interesting we may watch. Now, do I expect a recommendation from ACUS specific to the sharing economy to path forward? No. But especially in the context of fast-moving industries, drones are a great example. I think that their work will be constructive. To wrap up my comments, I wanted to say that in light of these several models on a federal framework, one of the things to keep in mind is where I started this conversation was not each competitor is completely distinct from the next competitor, especially when you subdivide by the different industries, which brings us to the point that for each competitor there's probably an appropriate regulator. With that in mind, with data, privacy issues, that's not a distinct harm associated with Uber. That's a harm that we would associate with several aspects of the app economy that like I mentioned, multi-stakeholder process would seek to solve, and subsequent legislation to solve. And so with that in mind, I think that as we move forward in this debate, it would make sense to think of it in a discrete, regulation and agency-specific way. But in closing, I would also point out that as we're thinking of this economy, we need to think of the next economy as well, which gets into the driverless cars issue of promoting competition and innovation in a way that's both consumer-friendly and also forward-thinking. With that, I yield back.
Thanks, Slade. I appreciate you yielding back. Four really divergent viewpoints from four different progressive thinkers, and I think that's really interesting. I wanted to have people, and Dennis, I'm going to give you the first crack at this, but I hope others will jump in, respond, and maybe you can elaborate on your point about getting up in front of this. And the title of our panel presumes regulatory challenges are out there and expresses the idea that maybe regulation would be a means for achieving some better future. As progressives, I want us to take a step back and ask, what are we trying to do here? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? Is there a problem? Are there a myriad of problems that we're trying to solve? And I would actually take us back 6 years. 2009, the economy's in shambles, millions of people are losing their jobs, and it's in response to that economic set of travails that a number of very innovative companies, including Uber, are sort of birthed. People trying to find a new means of creating income, and their traditional jobs or lives are lost. People who have graduated with fancy degrees and suddenly can't find a path into the workforce. People who are displaced from the workforce and need to pick up extra income. And it seems to me as a progressive that there's nothing more progressive than allowing people a path forward to producing a livelihood for their family using assets which they already own or have access to. Their home, rental property, their car, etc. So I wonder about the juxtaposition of this set of progressive values, allowing people to sort of emancipate and self-earn and help move their families forward or their own livelihood. And this idea that there may be safety or public issue concerns that we need to think through. And so I'm inviting everybody to respond to Dennis's point after Dennis gets to elaborate on it about what are we getting out in front of. Is there a set of problems? Is there a problem that we can identify that requires a regulatory response?
That's a great question, and I think this is they're different. There's no one problem that is uniform across the sharing economy. Obviously, there's a number of different things, and you are absolutely right in terms of the emancipation principle that the sharing economy allows people to sort of take more control of their economic future. I will say, I'm going to talk for a second about Uber and my concerns there, which hopefully they'll be illustrative, and then I want to go into a different one. For me, I will tell you this, I don't know about Paris, but I can tell you San Francisco is the worst city in the world to get a cab in. And when I was running for mayor several years ago, and I talked about that I would immediately put 2,500 cabs on the street, I got nothing but hell from medallion owners. So, from my perspective, in terms of protecting the taxi industry, that is something that I don't really care at all about, and the fact of the matter is they have themselves to blame for Uber's entry into the marketplace and filling the vacuum, because the old adage, if you build it, they will come, Uber is a #1 example of that in San Francisco, and I'm sure in every other city, to the point where now you have young folks that don't even want to own cars anymore because it's easier to get an Uber or a Lyft. For Uber, for me, the concern is about two issues, really. It's actually one: protecting the consumer and public safety. And I think, at least initially, like any new company, there was sort of a libertarian ethic that was there, which was better to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. But we have seen, with respect to Uber, I think, a maturation in how the company has addressed issues. They went to the state PUC to deal with their black cars. UberX, now they've been working on insurance products. I will say another example is down at our airport, they had to be permitted to go to the airport. And it was actually very telling that I think the leadership of the company, who historically did not have a reputation for working with municipalities and states, did step up and negotiate an agreement with the airport. So I think that they have made strides in that area. As long as we're protecting public safety and insurance is taken care of, that's the issue with respect to Uber. I'm perfectly fine with them addressing those issues. Now let's take the home rental and Airbnb. That focuses on a different set of issues. If you look at the cost of real estate in San Francisco, I'm using that as an example, right? Studio apartments now, average rent, $3,000 a month for a studio. I'm not even talking about home ownership. So there's a whole separate group of issues that you're dealing with in the home rental market. That is, now we're taking away rental stock in probably the most land-constrained city in America. People can't get housing, people are being forced out, number one. Number two, what happens if there's a fire in a building and the underwriter, an insurer, refuses to provide coverage and somebody's injured? Number three, there are reasons that we have zoning laws and why hotels are zoned for certain areas. You don't want to ruin your character, right? So you don't want to have a bunch of hotels in your neighborhood in your quiet residential neighborhoods. That that sort of addresses a whole separate group of issues. And these rise in a myriad of different forms, but those two are, I think, the most dramatic examples. And it's certainly progressive to empower people economically, but it's just as progressive to make sure that you're striking the right balance with protecting the common weal of the community and its social fabric and what we have, so that it's not just about economic attainment, it's about protecting the values of the community. And that sort of goes, it means different things for different industries.
Responses to that?
I might just add a few thoughts to that as well, which is well played. The first is that there's, and sort of in remarks, active litigation currently around employment rights, and that's one of the areas where there are some mixed incentives and possible externalities associated with business model for sharing economy at large, and specifically with Uber and some other parties. This does get into the forced arbitration agreement issue, wherein employees of companies within this economy have restricted the rights of employees to, employees are bound to arbitrate in venues that are either difficult to access, or if I drive a car in Virginia, I don't necessarily want to go to Arizona or California and appear before an arbitrator who's hired by the company I am contesting the practices and policies of. So that's not necessarily positive. So in that vein, Shannon, this Riordan is currently litigating this issue, and intended to do so on a class basis, which I think that the progressive position here would be that class actions are a valuable tool for encouraging positive corporate behavior through the threat of litigation, which would probably be more difficult to take on a case-by-case basis or a regular basis, employee by employee. The second thing I would argue, and this is dovetailing on the comments that are already made, is the issue of scaling quickly. And this is sort of the new fast and break stuff model that is important to venture capital, which is for a small competitor to be taken seriously by venture capitalists, it has to have users. It has to have a rapid growth in its user base. Its user base has to typically involve some data collection, so there are metrics reportable to venture capitalists if you want to see funding. I may have a great idea, maybe I have a great app, but I want to see funding for that app unless I have a large user base. So with that in mind, this goes into the issue of incentives and externalities. It is within the business model of this economy to grow as quickly as possible. Now, that doesn't necessarily impute bad motives to startups, and certainly not large competitors. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that I think as companies mature, they realize that they need to build in certain safeguards to protect user trust, protect user experience, protect their employees as time goes on. Or at least that's what I think we're seeing. And that's something that, behaviorally, it would be nice to see other companies as well, but I understand that, it's sort of a fight, dog-eat-dog world. That's not always the case.
Well, just to, I guess, I agree with Dennis. I think that your focus on protecting consumers and public safety are ones we agree with. And we've seen states and cities pass regulations and laws across the country that do kind of narrowly focus on achieving those specific public policy objectives. We've also seen successful and unsuccessful attempts at those levels of government to go well beyond that to protect public safety and protect the consumer. And that's I think where we've ended up fighting those efforts, because we think, in some cases, it's simply a matter of either the legislatures themselves or the industries that they've been regulating for a long time are so used to one paradigm, and they think that is the only way to achieve public safety goals, consumer protection goals, and that's simply not the case in our view. There are other ways to do it, in part through leveraging industry, in part through some government oversight through these regulatory models that make, at least in our case, in the area of ride sharing, companies in those industries responsible for ensuring certain public safety goals and consumer protection goals are met. And then just to Slade's point, I think we've realized some things that can be done better to protect consumers. One of which you may be well aware of, that we came to an agreement with the Attorney General of New York a number of last year or months ago to cap our dynamic pricing mechanism. We call surge pricing during certain states of emergency, and that has now been actually enacted into law in certain places as well. And we understand why that would be sort of an appropriate thing to do.
Just to kind of chime in here, I think I could agree with what everyone has previously stated, especially with regard to the public safety concerns and considerations. But one of the things that I do find interesting when you kind of take a step back and look at this is how industry stakeholders start to come together. I mean, and by no means can I speak on behalf of Uber, you could probably tell this story better than I could, but having worked with the insurance industry at times, and just understanding how squeamish they were when Uber started to gain growing popularity and other ride-sharing companies. The same with Airbnb in terms of, who's liable for what type of coverage needs to be available. And, I think just over the, course of a few short years, they've been able to kind of come to a happy medium and come to a good place where they feel that, there's proper insurance coverage for this kind of emerging technology and all these different scenarios, and that the consumer would ultimately be protected should something happen. So, I think it's fascinating to kind of see how quickly industry players work together, kind of to meet those goals that Dennis, that you and or someone in your position would have for a municipality. One other thing I just kind of wanted to chime in, and I think this is very unique to the tech sector, is that when we're looking at kind of models of regulation and the best ways to achieve those public safety standards, is to really kind of consider who these companies are. And perhaps Uber or Airbnb might not be the best example of this, but a lot of times we have to be careful not to misconstrue a company with a large user base for a large company. A lot of times, some of these app developers or technology companies are very small in terms of the amount of employees or legal departments that they have. So, one of the things, and this is kind of one of the considerations when trying to strike that balance that we've been kind of all echoing up here about the proper amount of regulation to reach public safety standards, but also to not stifle innovation. And when you're looking at some companies that have these large user bases that touch millions of people, but are actually quite small companies, you kind of have to keep that in mind, that these are the people who are creating the next wave of great technology. So we want to be mindful of that we're not stifling that type of thought and that type of progression.
Yeah, there's something I wanted to add because it's kind of been around the periphery here, but it goes to progressivism, it goes to what you just talked about, a small company or a large company. Slade made reference to it, and Matt, I know he alluded to the relationship with their drivers. And the big elephant in the room is there's a lot of cases out there. Are the drivers, we're using Uber as an example, are they employees or independent contractors? And that could be a big game changer on a lot of these issues. And there's two cases right now in San Francisco that Slade referred to. One before Judge Chen and one before Judge Chavria, federal district courts, one against Lyft, one against Uber, where motions for summary judgment were denied, saying that the folks are independent contractors and they're supposed to go to trial. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with respect to those cases and other cases around the country in other industries with respect to are these independent contractors or employees, and how does that impact what various companies are doing and what is going to be the policy response. I think that is really going to be a fascinating thing to watch develop. So it's just something I wanted to throw out there.
I was going to save this until later in the question and answer period, but my question is really one about how much do we have to be concerned as progressive thinkers about incumbent industries using the public safety concern or concerns about contractor or labor relations and using those against upstart businesses when they haven't been worked out. There's a bill pending before the Sacramento, or in Sacramento before the California legislature, which would impose drug testing on drivers in rideshare. You can imagine that same sort of safety concern being applied, that people who are in certain types of the sharing economy must do X or Y and perhaps surpass a certain standard. I assume the drug use is relatively consistent across the entire population, across people working throughout all sectors of the economy, and yet we don't have drug testing being imposed. How much do we have to be concerned about incumbent businesses waving the public safety flag and using the regulatory system to thwart competition that might harm consumers who benefit from, say, cheaper prices or more ubiquity of services and goods? I wonder if you could react to that.
Well, I mean, I would say that this happens every single day in my world where we see arguments brought up that we don't think have good public policy basis we can continue, even if at one point in time there may have been good reasons for some sort of requirement to be in place, and something like a police drug test is a great example. In that I think there's been a lot of research and literature to show that something in a sort of pre-screen when somebody knows it's coming sort of drug test is not frequently not very effective because someone can plan for it. It doesn't necessarily is a predictor of future behavior. And I know we're not here to talk about drug testing in particular, but it is marched out as something required a taxi. I think our position is why is it required a taxi? I mean, if it's an ineffective tool to achieve public safety and public policy goals, then let's level the playing field there too. A number of requirements that are the taxi industries are subject to may not necessarily make sense anymore. And we've been in favor in cases of saying, okay, let's clear it away for everyone. Let's have something where you're trying to achieve sort of results of safer rides. And we believe we have ways through our technology, for instance, to do that through the rating system, through sharing where you're going, and other features. So that's kind of.
How much do we have to worry about big businesses using incumbent lobbying power and other political recourse? And again, waving public safety as the concern, perhaps one that we all agree upon as a means of thwarting competition.
I think that is you have to expect it. It's kind of the nature of the game. There's lobbyists on all sides. I've been lobbied by the taxi industry to do X or Y against Uber and Lyft, a million different occasions. I meet with everybody. If everyone wants to come talk to me, I meet with them. So I'm a little bit jaded about anybody coming to lobby. So I don't know how much you have to worry about it, but you have to understand that it's going to happen, and I think it's incumbent on those of us that are in positions of authority to be able to sort of sift through the chaff to find out really what is a legitimate interest and what's just being used to maintain a competitive advantage. But I would expect that there are incumbents who want to protect their position, so it's you have to be aware of it. Certainly.
I would only add a little better level that there have been arguments. Go back to our case paper. Regulatory capture being one of the risks of increased regulatory schemes, and I think that when we think again as from an agency-specific framework for what regulates kinds of need, that's a pretty bold accusation when you consider the FTC that someone would argue is under-enforcing in the privacy context, or someone argue by progressives, or other agencies that if anything are taking their time to try to promote innovation and try not to have heavy-handed, sort of short, near-term viewpoint. With that said, in return to the original question that's been posed, maybe the large incumbent using their market power to either influence legislation, local rules, etc., versus the small, emerging competitor. I think that that argument may have been truer for the huge paradigm shift we've seen in the past 5, maybe 7 years, where I think now, certainly from Washington's perspective, the Hill, backwards looking at times, is as startup friendly as I think it's ever been. And I think that there's a collective, and this is not just one party that's not one of this collective sense of pride around this economy, and certainly in promoting innovation from both parties. I don't think either party has monopoly on that issue. With that being said, I think that if you look outside of this limited economy, certainly scale is important, and valuations matter, and even larger than the ability to compete on an individual your platform or your product. Yes, I do think size matters. So I don't think there's any way of escaping that. It's certainly something that I think federal regulators should.
Well, as the president lobbyist on this panel, you're right, Slade. I think size matters, especially in Washington, where people kind of toss around resources, or some people can do it easier than others, right? But I think, especially in the tech sector and in this space, everyone kind of started as a startup at some point. And because for the tech sector to continue to grow, and for these new and emerging technologies to create the next new economy, the startup is kind of necessary. Like that's a factor. That's one of the things that kind of flows into, it's a necessary factor for that kind of prescription for the next whatever big thing it's going to be. So, I mean, I've kind of found that there's a sensitivity to the startup, and kind of more so protecting the ability to innovate as opposed to just protecting the market share. And I'm not saying that there's no desire to protect your market share as well, but I've found that I think companies are very sensitive to if that's their position, and want to do that in a way that doesn't necessarily hurt the look back.
Yeah, and just to build off that point, the type of enforcement actions we see from the FTC on in the app economy are apps that promise secure your zits by showing the photo picture face. Like, these aren't exactly the type of gold standard startups that we associate with the type of conversation we're having now. And the major regulation that we've seen in the past 6 months was solely, the thrust of it was protecting the virtuous cycle of innovation, which I don't understand is to be exactly what you described, which is everyone starts somewhere, and it's usually not with a lot of cash, right? So with that in mind, I think that's sort of the sensitivities that I was trying to describe. And if anything, when it comes to enforcement actions, I think that federal regulators were looking at a target-rich environment of incumbents that they're imposing sanctions against. So we see that, it's like which of the competitors in the app economy are subject to consent decrees, the very large ones. Which of the competitors in the telephony space are subject to major penalties in the past 6 months? The incumbents. It's not the startup that has been imposed multi-million-dollar fines. So with that in mind, I think that that is probably evidence of the idea that while not easy, startups are certainly put in a separate space and maybe forgiven of short-term contracting cases.
When I first started at Facebook, I was taught a rule called the 400, 800, 1200 rule, which was generally in Silicon Valley, or companies that are like those in Silicon Valley. When you get to 400 people, you get your first policy lawyer on staff. When you get to 800, you get your first lobbyist, and when you get to 1200, you've got an entire team of people working on these issues. So I think size does matter, right? So there are a lot of companies out there that are far smaller than 400 people who are yet important parts of the sharing economy. I want to shift again a little bit. If you look at me, it's obvious I'm a big fan of food. And in particular, I've become a big fan of food trucks in Washington. And so my next question is about what happens when new entrants enter a market and may have advantages that folks who are already present in a market don't have to deal with, and so they can get further faster. There's been a big uproar in the last couple of years about the food trucks in DC and every major city, because they don't have to pay any kind of rent. They're not really paying the same kind of taxes, and they can set up shop at the most advantageous corner or park or venue. And I wonder if, thinking about that kind of model and shifting a little bit from what we've been talking about, do we have a responsibility as progressives to help the rest of the economy respond to the entrant of new markets, new market participants? Do we have to think about what happens when the taxi driver is displaced, when the restaurant loses business, when the hotel or lodging or B&B is suddenly set up with new competition? Do we have a responsibility to those people who kind of built their businesses and their livelihoods around those, and if so, what? And please don't say there's not going to be more food trucks.
I think that the natural analogy for the food truck is the short-term rental market, where instead of having a bin being food, you're popping up all over the city in nicer neighborhoods where perhaps hotels are either zoned out of or just can't exist in for certain reasons. And the big issue there is tax collection, tourist tax, where a hotel is obligated to pay these taxes, and large companies like Airbnb are doing their best to collect taxes out of the acknowledgement that there is an impact of the tourism industry on the local resources of the city, and that that impact should certainly accommodate the needs of the local citizens, et cetera. The other issue, even beyond taxes, when we think about the incumbent maybe just being disadvantaged by the upstart competitor, there's a lack of transparency. There's certain asymmetries when it comes to perhaps hotel chain and a short-term rental startup in terms of operating illegally versus legally, locally, and the type of problems that might be associated with just like with the food truck, where we want to be sure that when we have food that it's cooked to an adequate temperature and it's not going to cause us to be sick. In the short-term rental market, obviously the major concerns are showing up at a house and it being in safe condition, you're not being dangers that you're aware of, and likewise that you're not causing radial damage to the area around you through excessive partying or whatever. Apparently there's a major story about that. Locally in DC, very recently on the subject of hundreds of people renting out a space to the detriment of the neighbors. But in any event, I think that all goes to the point of, yes, there are some situations where the emerging competitor has slight advantages, but long term, and this is in the literature, there's already an indication that these hotel chains that are competing locally are trying to innovate around this model. Yes, they will still be disadvantaged in that theoretically at least they will be legal, they'll have to licenses for what they're doing, and they will be collecting taxes. So, like anything, there might be a slight disadvantage in that sense. But I think that the market is evolving in that direction, which is the original point I was trying to make.
Dennis wants to jump in. Go ahead.
No, I think that to Slade's point, that if you listen to everything that he talked about, it was in the broader context of being concerned about the community at large. And I would agree with him that that is where, if we're going to be concerned, we should err on the sake of being concerned about the broader impact in the community, rather than a real intrusion into the competitive marketplace where you're really trying to sort of manage to, on behalf of, say, an incumbent industry that might be being displaced. I would err on that side. I mean, the two examples that we have on this, the food trucks have a great product, right? You can never, when you have a great product, it's sort of, everybody's willing to look the other way a little bit. And in San Francisco, we went through that, right? But you haven't seen any diminution whatsoever with brick and mortar restaurants. It's forced everybody to lift their game a little bit. I will say that I took a cab over here today, and it's the first time I've been in a DC cab in a while. It was a lot better than the last time I was in a DC cab. So maybe it's Uber's having that effect. But I do think we do have a broader societal concern that we have to be aware of, and I would sort of be more concerned about that rather than competitive marketplace, at least for me.
I guess I would just say that I think this is, one area where the sharing economy might be somewhat diffuse, and you have to look at what the businesses are and where the displacement is happening, because at least, from the perspective of the industry we operate in and the company Uber, I mean, we've seen taxi drivers leave what they're doing because they find much better economic opportunity in using their own car or purchasing a car and driving on our platform. And the displacement is occurring, at least it's occurring with the medallion owners and the bigger companies who are not keeping up with modernizing their product and improving it. And so I think sort of focusing on sort of specifically, who's being displaced and what business we're talking about. I think it's an important thing to do.
It seems that we've sort of come to a little bit of agreement that if there's going to be regulation of the sharing economy, from the progressive viewpoint, it should be from a light touch standing, right? I think that's what I'm hearing from the four of you. If there's agreement, that's where it's at. Here's the question, and I'll give a story to give you a little time to think and respond. Are we presuming that there's going to be a certain amount of downside and some individuals are going to get hurt or suffer while we figure out what to do with a new type of sharing business that comes into the marketplace? Are we just agreeing that the net social value of having new entrants in the marketplace, new types of sharing economy actors is so great that we're okay with a couple of acute moments of harm? Here's a good example. A few years ago, Airbnb, famous story, individuals go and they rent an apartment and the apartment gets robbed, ransacked, and Airbnb was not in a position at that point to do anything about it and was quite honestly refusing to do it until they were shamed by an article in TechCrunch. And it became literally a cause celeb overnight. Certainly in Silicon Valley, but everybody who's an Airbnb user. Suddenly there were hundreds of stories talking about how this had happened, how terrible it was, how slow the company was to respond, and how tone deaf. And Airbnb was literally, I think, shamed at that moment into changing its policies, and has since really, I think, sort of stepped up their game. It was instructive to me that one, you can shame a brand new company. It's usually, I think, companies with big public portfolios and PR departments and stock prices that you can shame into a better sense of behavior. But again, let me return to the question: are we assuming with a light touch regulatory scheme or no touch regulatory scheme that we're going to have moments like this and we're going to have to rely on either public shame or, as I think some people raised, lawsuits, criminal actions to clean up some of the messes that may have gone on?
I don't think there's, at least from my perspective, I don't think there's a presumption. I do think that obviously some government regulation is appropriate on the issues that I sort of outlined, at least for me. And I think it's unfortunate that you have to go through the shame. But especially when the story is, right, it's sharing economy, it's to help the community, it sort of cuts, when you have to be shamed into doing the right thing, it cuts against the very foundation of what it is that is the rationale for your business. So I'm unwilling to accept that you have to sort of tolerate real egregious examples of harm. I think if you are a socially responsible company, whatever the company is, and you talk about wanting to empower your community, it's incumbent on you to step up and do the right thing. Do the right thing from the beginning and not have to be shamed about it. And I would hope, and I will tell you, the reason that I think that companies react so well to shaming is because they know it's the right thing to do. And I think that they feel a little bit guilty about it. So I think that light touch doesn't necessarily mean that people should get a free pass from doing the right thing.
Right, and just to build on that, one of an example of this is not necessarily the sharing economy, but certainly sharing to Snapchat, which was, in a way, shamed to change its API practices in response to the, data breach and subsequent link of thousands and thousands and thousands of what were assumed to be teenagers' photos, just through an insecurity issue involving not Snapchat servers, but the use of API and third-party servers, so application programming interface, which for startups are important to being used across multiple platforms, but carries the risk of security breaches. In response to a series of articles and to bring arbitration back into this, there's substantial pressure from several progressive public interest groups, specifically on the point of Snapchat had forced arbitration clauses such that if teenagers' photos appeared on revenge porn blog or something of that nature, they have no recourse in a court of law against the company. Well, in light of this substantial pressure and some legislative pressure in this area, Snapchat, one, closed up its API security policies. 2, hire security professionals, getting to the quarter 8 or 12 issue that Tim spoke about earlier. And 3, change their policies. And I think that indicates, one, a willingness to be flexible in response to concerns when they arise, which the media is an important aspect of any type of environment when it comes to promoting the public interest, obviously. But then, more to the point, you have the concern of companies like this building these protections in by design, which is sort of a more global effort when it comes to privacy and other consumer protection issues, that these are built in from the onset, that user trust is an important fundamental aspect of these economies, and that's backed up by numerous surveys and polls, most recently by Q. And I think companies are turning around to it, but that, again, is balanced by the scale issue we spoke to earlier and the mixed incentives to scale quickly to exist, right, and to grow to survive. And so these two things, I think, will constantly ebb and flow with this economy.
I think this kind of goes back to a point that you made, I think, about when something's new, whether it's a new startup company or a novel idea, they're literally growing pain. There are unintended consequences and unfortunate incidents. I don't think that's something that should be presumed or necessarily tolerated, but it's kind of something that happens. It's not something that I think is specific to sharing economy participants. But on the flip side, there are benefits that happen as well that you might not have thought would happen. I mean, discrimination has been an issue that's kind of come up in the context of the sharing economy. Whether people using these platforms, it gives them kind of a mechanism by which they can kind of deploy their own, their own biases against different people or different issues. But at the same time, I'm sure, on the rainy day in Paris, when they're trying to get a cab, no one ever thought that, Uber would be like a black man's dream, right? Trying to catch a taxi at night as a black man was traditionally a very, very difficult thing to do. And now, it's some of these kind of unintended consequences or unintended things that have emerged from these new and novel ideas have helped to remove some of those barriers as well. So, and I'm not trying to throw that out to say that it's okay for someone's house to get robbed or for someone to be hurt. There's bad actors, there's bad things. But I think that, those things happen when you have novel ideas, and I think it's important. There's a responsibility for the industry and for the players in that industry to respond quickly and try to put in measures to prevent those types of bad things, as quickly and as responsibly as possible.
So I promised everybody here we got time for questions, and we still do. And thank you for being patient. I'm going to give you one more question in my panel, and then I'm going to open it up for people to ask questions from the audience. I think we're going to have you stand up and identify yourself when you do. I don't think we've got a microphone out there that's going to work, so we'll just, do we have a mic?
You just use this podium.
Yeah, maybe people keep up here so we can get your questions recorded as well. So, Christina, you just set me up for what was going to be my last question. And let me tell another story, again, personally, to give people a little context. When I was a baby lawyer, I had my first job on Capitol Hill. I worked for Senator Feingold, and my very first issue, Slade, was forced arbitration clauses. And this was well before there was anything like a Facebook, anything before there was a social economy, much less a sharing economy. And that issue has not been resolved, and it was one that we found, was becoming rampant throughout the broader economy. And so I'm wondering if people could react to this idea. Is it in fact that there's something so novel about the sharing economy, or is it in fact that we are getting more scrutiny from the media and from progressives because of the newness of this type of economy, and therefore these types of businesses, the tech businesses who are innovating, are getting more scrutiny, whereas the rest of the traditional standardized economy is getting kind of a pass right now while we're imposing responsibilities to resolve problems that haven't been resolved, discrimination, or forced arbitration clauses, or public safety issues in the other old line guard industries. And I wonder if people would react. Christina was very eloquent about this just a moment ago.
Yeah, what the bill to which Tim refers is the Arbitration Fairness Act, which was defined by champion before he left Congress, and Senator Franklin is getting out of his style, Congressman Johnson. And yes, that's an excellent point, saying that, I guess as the who put it, we the old law things, and we the new law things, the old law things are not necessarily new concerns. As progressives, I think that, there's broad agreement that employees should have the broadest rights possible, consumers should be protected. Regulations, get a bad name in that, it seems like there are a lot of lawyers and that no one really cares about them until they need one, or they wish there was one. There ought to be a law. I wish that, or where there's a collapse or failure to enforce regulations. Amtrak, the rail Amtrak, as it was an example of that. There's broad agreement that trains should be traveling at an excess of 100 miles an hour, and thankfully the Department of Transportation regulates this. So that's something they have to worry about every time they go on a train. So yes, so there are legacy concerns too with them, but there are emerging concerns. I don't think that I have a young child at home, and I have no idea what kind of issues we're going to have to deal with in the next 10 years. It's terrifying. I don't know if parents deal with it today. I don't think any parent could see having to talk to their children about selfies and the risk associated with oversharing to get into privacy issues. One of the things I also point out, and I harped a lot about privacy today, but it's one of the main issues I think when it comes to the AFCON generally, sharing on this part, is that yes, these are both concerns. One of the central treatises on privacy dates back to the issue of someone basically crashing into a lawn party, Brandeis in Boston. And so to that point, what is old is new again, and yet we still have new challenges.
I'm sure Matt thinks that everybody's picking on these guys when everybody's regulating them. And he thinks, not focused on the old guys. I don't necessarily think, at least from my perspective, that there's more scrutiny being given to the new kids on the block and old guys, old established players who get passed. I think it's a lot of the issues are the same. It's just by nature of that many of the sharing economy businesses are disrupting, and the issues that are arising as a result of those, which is driving an increased focus on it. I don't necessarily think that old established players are getting passed, but when you're disrupting and you're breaking a little bit of China, people are going to be focused on the issues that are coming out of it. It's just the nature of the beast. And let's face facts, from a media perspective, they want to focus on what's sexy and what's new. And they'd much rather do an investigative story on Uber or somebody else than to be ranked about GE. They'd probably rank about GE all they wanted to. So I just think it's the nature of the beast in terms of the focus and the attention to focus on the new novel thing. But I don't think that old established players are getting passed.
Yeah, I think you were just called sexy by Dennis. So. Do you want to respond to that?
Not that in particular, but I think Dennis, the other things he said very well, and I can't speak to the old players, but there is this cycle of, I think we've seen this because, like any entity that ends up in the news, you see clips about sort of how you're being written about, and we'll see media stories where the kind of tie-in to Uber Technologies is about as slight as you can imagine, but if they can get it into the title of the article, then it gets more clicks, and is sort of just my hypothesis, and that results in, it's something in the paper, which means more public or regulatory scrutiny, which means that sort of we end up talking to those folks more.
I want to thank all my panelists. It's your chance to ask some questions. People who'd like to, can you mind lining up with the microphone? Please, if you could tell us who you are and your way, please, for everybody's benefit. Please, sir, go ahead.
The commission of our hosts and appearing to be the oldest one in the room, having begun working for the federal government in 1963 and been in all three branches of the government, running 2 nonprofits, and represented a new industry in its infancy when its competitors pharmaceutical companies thought they were enough of a danger that they tried to put them out of business using this very body, and to pass a law that would basically prevent generic pharmaceuticals from coming on the market for a long, long time. And I suggest that that historical analogy is one that we can all learn a lot from. I am totally uninvolved in this debate until today, and just hearing you speak, I am amazed at how analogous this debate is. Now, we have a monument to that confrontation in something called the Hatch-Waxman Act. And fortunately, all of you are old enough to know who Hatch and who Waxman are, and to realize that to get an act named the Hatch-Waxman Act required a lot of work by a lot of people, but it first required the generic drug industry, which I was the first Washington representative of, to beat back the large companies. So I think that I hear the potential for the same kind of dynamic if the status quo advocates can accept the fact that the status quo is going to change and does not have as its major strategy stopping progress. Now, whether on the specifics of this issue, Uber is good, bad, or different, I've only ridden Uber twice when somebody else was paying for it, so I don't know what it costs or whether they who use it daily are satisfied. But I'm willing to assume that there are all sorts of minor issues like that. But the major issue is, can the two sides of this argument, and I'm sure there are more than two sides, start talking about a rapprochement and a way of going into the future so that both types of entities can coexist and profit, because as far as I know, big pharma is still in business, and generics are no longer small family operated companies. They're pretty big, and some of them do pretty well. So I see a great opportunity here, and even as a total ignoramus on the current IT revolution, I just got my first iPhone this year, and I've already destroyed it. I think it's something that even I can understand and see some potential. So I'm very happy that this is occurring. I couldn't figure out at first why ACS, which I care a lot about, was doing this, but now I see it, and I think it's a wonderful issue to confront and participate in with no pre-opinion as to how it should come out, except that the consumer and society should benefit.
Thank you so much for your comments. Reactions from the panel. This is not our first rodeo, right? Does that change anything? What should we learn from past historical lessons? Are there any?
Yeah, it's the nature of change, right? Those that read more history do repeat it, right? So you just got to make sure that you're staying aware and looking to see what historical analyses are there that guide you in the future, but have to be aware of it.
Hey, I'm Joseph Jerome with Future of Privacy Forum, so you can guess I'm going to be asking the obligatory privacy question. Good range of lawyers here from a lot of different areas, so I figured there's some interesting perspectives here. So I guess I come at this from the idea that the peer-to-peer exchange platforms are collecting a whole lot of data about a whole lot of different people, users being average consumers, and then also sort of the providers of these services and products. So I'm just wondering what everyone's approach is from sort of a high level as to how to balance sharing and using that information both to not only improve services, increase trust among users, but also sort of use this to share with cities, improve smart city initiatives. Then also sort of deal with user privacy, user anonymity, and then just, I guess, government and law enforcement access. Certainly I can think of, both Airbnb and Uber have dealt with various instances in New York City of, I guess I would say, overbroad government requests for data. And certainly with Uber, they want to provide this information to cities to optimize traffic. But then once this information is given to the government, it can be accessed to freedom of information requests and then released publicly. So just sort of looking for people's high-level thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks for your question. I think to your point, anytime you have any entity that is collecting and storing large amounts of information that can really tell the entire story of an individual's life, right? You always want to make sure that there's proper safeguards are in place to make sure that that information is safe, to make sure that it's stored however it is stored, that there are barriers to hackers and things of that nature. But I think this debate happens in a lot of different policy spaces, right? I mean, you have the debate around NSA surveillance, and that's actually been going on this week in the House, and just in the gathering of that type of information and the access that the government has to that. Then you have on the other side of that, kind of in everyday criminal justice space, you have the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which governs, how and when law enforcement and the government can access our personal and private communications, and also, when and how the government can track us using information that's stored by companies like Uber or Airbnb, or that's just on our cell phones, or information that's in the cloud. And I think, a lot of we've been talking about regulating privacy, regulating kind of at the state level, but when it comes to some of these privacy discussions, these are constitutional issues. Some of this is rests in the Fourth Amendment, and I think that's actually a debate that can happen and should happen at the federal level. And I think there are varying perspectives on what needs to be done. There are varying pieces of legislation out there as to how it should be approached. I think some of the issues in the privacy space are because of these emerging technologies, and it's a classic example of technology outpacing the law. When we talk about ECPA, that bill was passed, and I don't even know if I was potty trained when ECPA passed, but it governs electronic communications and information stored in the cloud. And, most people have a reasonable expectation over a document or something that they store in Dropbox, or, but legally there's a variance between storing a paper document in your file cabinet versus storing it elsewhere, storing it in the cloud. And I think that there is, maybe the broad general public might not realize that, but it's increasingly becoming more, people are increasingly becoming more aware of that. And I think a lot of companies are trying to take steps to the best of their ability to ensure, safeguards for their users. But I do think that there's some work to be done at this level as well.
Just to respond to a couple of your questions. I mean, I think others on the panel have said this, but in our view, when it comes to sort of a lot of the privacy rules and applicability of privacy laws, we don't necessarily see something distinct about the sharing economy. I think it's important to look at the business that the sharing economy, sort of whatever company in that economy is operating, and then kind of what laws that already exist might be subject to, whether it's unfair, deceptive, abusive practices, trade practices laws, or data breach notification laws, etc. So it seems like there's already a panoply of state and to some extent federal laws that apply, and you have to look at the business at issue and see which applies. And I think we understand the needs for law enforcement to potentially have see certain types of information in my hold. We of course safeguard user privacy zealously, and so in those contexts we've always insisted law enforcement go through some sort of process.
whether it's a subpoena or other sort of other legal process, so that we're sure that this is not a fishing expedition or an unwarranted invasion of someone's privacy. And actually, what we've unfortunately seen in the legislative efforts at the state level are state legislatures not really sort of being willing to support the level of process and the laws that it has. But we've still sort of insisted on seeing it when we make those requests.
Okay, one last quick question, and I think we're almost out of time. So, sir, if you ask your question quickly, we'll do one last set of responses. And I'll let my panelists have any last word that they might want to share, and then we'll wrap it up. But before we leave, I want to thank again ACS, National Convention, June 11th through the 13th. If you're a local progressive lawyer, you should join. ACS staff in the back, raise your hands so you can talk to people. They're there. Go find them or they'll tackle you. And we'll finish up. Again, one more thanks to the House Judiciary and Committee staff for their time and for sharing this space. Sir, please.
A really quick correction and a really quick question, if I may. Correction, Slade, it's fine that trains go 100 miles an hour. It's not fine when they go 100 miles an hour around a curve built to go 50, and they don't have a government-like technology that's been around for decades. Maybe your committee can do something. And then a quick question for Matt Burton. Nice to see you again. So I think it's great that you have progressive city attorneys like Dennis in some major American cities. I heard you allude to a problem in New York State. It made me think for the cities and counties and states that don't have progressive like Dennis who welcome you with open arms, don't you want to be a little bit more careful about some of these sort of corporate citizenship transparency issues so that you have more credibility in the jurisdictions that are not so long?
I'll open that up to the whole panel too, generally by the lead judiciary economy.
I mean, thanks. Good to see you too, Dan. I think we do find we want to find productive partnerships with cities, states, sort of local regulatory agencies, regulators, and I think on transparency, it's not totally clear sort of what aspect of transparency is important here, but we have seen in certain places, and New York is one place where there's been this sort of very intense desire for regulators to see certain types of data that we have, whether it's personal data of our users or data about the trips that occur on the platform. And as you can imagine, for user data, we think that's sensitive for privacy reasons, and for things like trip data, that's sensitive because a lot of that information is trade secret information and confidential business information. And so the conversation we've tried to have about that is to find out what purposes these regulators are really trying to achieve for needing that data, to try to narrow down and find ways to help them achieve those goals without potentially having to give over a lot of information that could then be subject to open record calls.
Dan, is that your name? Okay.
I'm Dan Jacobs. I teach at American and George Washington University.
My alma mater? Okay. So, to Matt's point, and to yours as well, I think transparency is incredibly important. But it's been very interesting. It's also about having respect for process, but also having relationships. And I will tell you that when I want information, I'm just going to use I haven't had this conversation with Google, but I've had it with Airbnb. When I need information and I want information, I pick up the telephone and I let them know a subpoena is on its way or whatever. And they have been, I have to give Airbnb, whenever I've never had beef with them giving me information and working it through. And them understanding the objective that I've been trying to achieve. And they've been very, very cooperative. I'm just using that as an example because they've been very, very good. And I think that it's important as the sharing economy businesses emerge that they understand the importance of a political maturation process, and that a regulator we have a legitimate reason perhaps for wanting the information, and the more that we can work together to satisfy an objective, even if we disagree, the better off that we are going to be, and more respect we're going to have for the process. And that's not something that I can overstate the importance of handling things that way. And it's an evolution.
I think your time is up. Please help me please join me in thanking our panelists, especially Dennis who flew all the way from San Francisco for it. And thank you.